Opening the door for piece development, this knight aims for central influence and flexibility. Asserting central space immediately, black contests the initiative and prepares to develop. Challenging black's central grip, this pawn thrust immediately fights for space and opens lines for pieces. Opening the kingside diagonal for the bishop and solidifying the central pawn structure. Preparing to fianchetto, the bishop opens a diagonal for potential queenside pressure and solidifies the pawn structure. Developing the knight to its natural outpost fortifies the center and prepares for further pawn expansion. Developing the bishop to guard the central pawn and prepare for queenside castling offers a solid foundation, awaiting black's intentions. Developing the bishop prepares for kingside castling, anchoring the center and solidifying black's setup. Solidifying the center and preparing queenside development, this move quietly builds a robust pawn structure. Securing the monarch is a prudent step, preparing to join the other pieces in the central fray. Solidifying the center and preparing for kingside castling demonstrates a commitment to robust development and controlled pawn structure. Instantly challenging white's central pawn structure, this advance ignites a fascinating battle for central dominance. Opening the center can be risky, but it forces black to commit their pawn structure immediately. Reclaiming the pawn immediately simplifies the position, opening diagonal lines for the bishop. Clearing the center often invites a tactical reshuffle and can expose pawns. Reclaiming the pawn with the exchange immediately releases central tension, opening diagonal lines for your bishop and setting up active piece play. Asserting central presence, white immediately challenges black's pawn structure and aims to open lines for their pieces. Opening the c-file presents tactical opportunities, but also demands careful pawn structure management moving forward. Reclaiming the pawn immediately frees the queen for active play, eyeing the kingside. Challenging the queen's central dominion, this bishop now eyes the queenside, activating the dark squares. Retreating the queen to d2 aims to regroup and prepare for queenside expansion, while keeping an eye on the center. Developing the knight to a more active central square is logical, bolstering the pawn on d5 and preparing for potential exchanges. Preparing to castle secures the king, while the bishop eyes the long diagonal for future piece activity. Shifting the bishop to prepare for its recapture on d5 after a potential pawn advance, eyeing the queen's diagonal. Safeguarding the king amidst the dawning central confrontation enhances piece harmony for a smooth development into the middle game. Exchanging the bishop for the knight surrenders the bishop pair advantage, potentially creating long-term positional weaknesses. Reclaiming the queen on the now open queen file strategically repositions your monarch and prepares for potential pawn structure advantages. Initiating activity on the queen side and creating pressure along the fifth rank, this queen's repositioning is a key attempt to disrupt white's smooth development. Centering the rook on the open d-file aims to contest control and pressure black's pawn chain. Unlocking the d-file for tactical skirmishes, this maneuver aims to challenge white's central control and activate the rook. Shifting the rook to the second rank aims to reinforce the pawn chain and potentially prepare a kingside maneuver, while avoiding immediate contact on the contested d-file. Reclaiming the d-file with the rook solidifies black's central presence and prepares for potential pawn advances. Establishing dominance over the d-file, white reinforces crucial central influence and prepares for future pawn pushes. Reinforcing the d-file, black solidifies their presence and prepares for potential struggles on this important open file, a key battleground. Solidifying the kingside pawn structure, preparing for potential king safety needs or pawn advances. A proactive step to curb white's bishop's potential outpost along the a1h8 diagonal. A bold knight jump, aiming to seize control of key central squares and pressure the opponent's pinned pieces. Sacrificing central control for an open file seems a risky proposition, potentially leaving the king exposed later. Reclaiming the queen establishes a balanced material situation and prepares for a potential pawn race. Asserting central presence, this queen maneuver aims to disrupt white's coordination and potentially initiate pawn advances. Solidifying the kingside and preparing for central pawn pushes demonstrates careful positional play. Securing the queen's bishop's diagonal and preparing to potentially challenge, the d-file provides a solid defensive structure. Recapturing the queen reestablishes the pawn structure's integrity and aims to simplify into a more manageable middle game for white. Asserting control of the crucial c-file, this rook aims to disrupt white's defensive setup and prepare for potential endgame skirmishes. This move cleverly centralizes the queen, aiming to disrupt black's coordination and potentially prepare a central pawn advance. Consolidating the rook's presence on the semi-open file prepares potential pressure or defense on that vital corridor. Repositioning the rook to d4 offers flexible support for pawn advances and reclaims an open file's influence. Initiating an endgame pawn structure, black aims to untangle the queenside and potentially create dynamic play on the open files. Initiating a pawn storm on the kingside, white aims to dismantle black's defensive pawn structure and expose the monarch. Securing the queenside and preventing white's kingside expansion, black aims for a more active piece placement. Aggressively advancing the kingside pawn here aims to disrupt black's pieces and create an escape square for the king, but it also weakens white's own pawn shield. Opening the h-file presents tactical possibilities, but also exposes your king. Reclaiming the open file with the queen offers a strong central presence and potential for pressure. This attempt to break open lines around white's king introduces significant weaknesses on the kingside. Unleashing the queen to threaten a dangerous discovered attack, though it risks overextension. Bringing the bishop back to defend the vulnerable pawn structure offers a bit more stability, though it sacrifices immediate central influence. Strategically repositioning the queen aims to redeploy pressure on the kingside pawns, a potential weakness that could be exploited later. Unleashing the f-pawn breaks open lines for black's rook, aiming for active play in the center. Targeting the kingside pawn structure for a potential breakthrough, aiming to exploit the weakened g-file. Unlocking the queenside might be a priority, but this maneuver offers little immediate threat. Shifting the king to a safer diagonal might prevent future issues. Restoring queen activity and offering piece exchange to simplify the board is a sound idea here. Initiating a potential kingside attack, this rook advance seeks to exploit open lines and pressure black's pawn structure. A tactical skirmish is brewing on the queenside as black repositions the rook to support a pawn advance or potential infiltration along the now open f-file, aiming to disrupt white's centralized queen. Initiating a daring kingside attack by sacrificing pawn structure for open lines, aiming to expose the black monarch. Shifting the rook to the b-file prepares to contest control of that open highway, adding pressure. Initiating a rook lift promises to exploit the kingside, but beware the potential for counterplay along the open files. Releasing the king from its protective pawn shield, aiming to activate it on the open files. A desperate gambit to distract the opponent's attention from the queenside advance. Sacrificing the bishop opens a critical diagonal and attempts to disrupt white's central control, but it exposes the king to potential discovery. Unleashing a dangerous discovered attack, this aggressive push threatens the black king's exposed position with immediate consequences. Protecting the rook and preparing to redeploy it to a more active file offers counterplay. Shifting focus to the kingside, this maneuver seeks to exploit potential weaknesses after black's pawn advances. Activating the rook on the 7th rank seems like an attempt to unpin the other rook and create some attacking potential, but it might overextend the pieces. Unleashing a pawn storm on the kingside aims to disrupt black's defensive structure and expose their monarch. Seizing the open file with tempo, this check forces white's king into an uncomfortable spotlight. Defending the king's escape squares becomes paramount as the rook swarm closes in on the monarch. Unveiling the king's sanctuary with a bold pawn push opens a risky pathway, prudence suggests reinforcing the monarch. Sensing black's king exposed, white forces a decisive attack by regaining the initiative with a sacrifice. Seeking to unleash an attack, black's bishop abandons its defensive post, potentially opening lines for white's aggressive pieces. Forcing the king into a desperate position highlights white's aggressive intent to expose the monarch. A tactical concession, yielding central control to secure the king's escape route. Uncovering the black king's retreat with a decisive check, forcing a critical choice for defense.